Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fair Chase podcast. This is the second week of our two-part series on some interviews that we did with biologists around mountain lion hunting. So, as many of you guys know, we went on this mountain lion hunt, rolled out a great film that told the story of a cool hunt for mountain lions. But because mountain lion hunting is such a controversial topic, it deals with the use of hounds, it's hunting a large predator. We thought we would spend some time interviewing some folks that have spent their careers studying mountain lions, get their perspective, and then share it with you. So initially, we thought we'd chunk it up and share it on social media, which we've done. But then we decided, hey, we've got this fantastic material and it's stuff that everybody interested in the topic should at least listen to. So what we've done is taken the interview and we've basically released the whole thing on our podcast. So that's what you'll be hearing coming up. Like I said last week, bear in mind that I was not mic'd when I was asking a lot of the questions. I'll see what I can do about cutting some of that out and just getting to the topic and what these folks are talking about. So last week was Dr. Julie Young of Utah State University. This week is Dr. Shawn Riley, former professor at MSU, Michigan State University, and also a guy who spent decades studying large carnivores and mountain lions. A really cool guy, and he's got a really interesting perspective on why hunting is important for managing lions and just the reality of what management and conservation looks like. So without further ado, here is our episode, and I hope you enjoy it.
So for more than 45 years, I've studied wildlife ecology and wildlife management, which I see as separate areas of fields of study and practice. Yeah, so my origins go back, like many people my age, with in the field to a desire to work out in the field with wildlife, and I studied coyote mule deer interactions in the Missouri River breaks related to grazing when I was a graduate student at Montana State University, and then I went into practice as a deer research biologist for a few years, and had a desire to try to change things. And so I moved into the area of management and then practiced for about 12 years as a wildlife management biologist in Montana and realized I was woefully unprepared for the whole concept of what management was really about, and that was people. I was pretty well versed on wildlife, population dynamics, habitat characteristics, but not about people and how to change behavior. So I went back for a mid-career doctorate in social psychology and economics and was part of a growing group that studied and applied what we call the human dimensions of wildlife management, which is now a portion of a bigger phenomenon called conservation social science. And I like to think I was on the forefront of that movement to understand how people come to value wildlife or not, how they develop acceptance of coexisting with wildlife or not, and try to inform, the governance of wildlife through understanding how people develop values, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. And I've worked on three continents, on applying this idea, so it's well spread out. Pretty much everyone knows now that the entire planet is inhabited by people, and there's nothing left untouched either directly or indirectly by people. So our behavior influences the habitat and population dynamics of everything that's wild, even in the deepest of wildernesses. And so ultimately, to change mortality rates for animals or to improve habitat, that's done by people for the most part. And so understanding how people come to value it, because if we don't value it, we won't manage it for its benefit. So I think it's a critical component that's often overlooked because most of us get in the field to jump out of helicopters on moose and capture, birds and do whatever, moving with animals out in the field. And I think management's a great invention of the 1800s and applied and refined in the early 1900s. it's not coincidental that our wildlife management frameworks and how it's embedded in government and governance systems, emerged out of those early errors of Teddy Roosevelt and a whole core of conservation heroes, really. I think wherever you look on the planet, as you move up the food chain, things become more and more contentious. Seldom do people get too worked up about killing cockroaches, but they'll get more concerned about rabbits and squirrels, and more concerned about larger predators, fur bears, fox, coyotes, wolves. And as you get to the apex of the food chain, which is typically cats, whether they're African lions, Bengal tigers, or mountain lions in North America, that's where the controversy really gets hottest. Well, there's always going to be what we call cascade effects when you eliminate any species at the top or the bottom. And with one that is a top level carnivore like a mountain lion, that's going to affect the ungulate populations. Some would say for the better, but on the other hand, these species evolved together, and there are a lot of interactions between those species for which we don't have full appreciation for, that those large carnivores played a role in creating, not as an intentional meaning, but of the white-tailed deer, of the mule deer, the elk, the moose. All these species have adapted to large carnivores through their evolutionary time period. It's only in the recent blink of an eye in the last 100 or 200 years have humans entered, at least in North America, in a way that was detached from nature, as we brought our principally European values and beliefs with us. So, and just from a human standpoint, there were a lot of people living in North America before Europeans hit here, and they felt they developed ways of coexisting. Sometimes, I guess people will call it harmoniously with species, but they because they were in this constant direct interaction, developed probably a little more of a reverence for some of these species. In today's world, where people are in the United States and Europe are pretty detached from that interconnection with large carnivores in wild areas, they're developing their belief system based on what I call vicarious interaction. And a lot of that has to do with media. For instance, lots of scholars have pointed to Bambi as probably being the most influential piece of media on influencing wildlife values in America. This is off film, but right over there is the original book of Bambi, which is written by Felix Salten. And it's nothing like the Disney Bambi. Nothing, except that it has deer and owls and rabbits and skunk in it. But it portrays, it was really written as a protest in part to fascism growing out of World War I. Man is in the forest, and how the evil influences of man only resulted in negative occurrences to nature. Yeah. So something like Bambi and the Lion King, no, I don't think many people who watch The Lion King actually think that the wildebeest kneel down with leopards and hyenas. I just got back from Africa, and I certainly didn't see that on the Serengeti. And so and I think most people don't believe that, but it influences in this long-standing desire that is biblical in our culture for seeking a balance of nature. You see it in the artistry of the early painters who painted what they wanted to see, not necessarily what they saw. And so that leads to, I think, a very important part relative to mountain lions that my old friend and colleague Daniel Botkin often said. What we understand about mountain lions is more about what we believe than what we know. And people with all different experiences with wildlife, right, are going to want to see different things. And it invokes different, not just imagery, but different tug of war between cognitions and emotions, which result in behavior. And so when mountain lions in the West, 20 years, 25 years after bounties ceased in 63 for area, mountain lions were kind of cool when they were framed as a ghost of the Rockies. But when they started sleeping in window wells in Missoula, Montana, were attacking or killing and partially consuming kids, like in Evero, Montana, Evergreen, Colorado, it wasn't just a isolated case. A fear factor came in, and so much of my work on mountain lions dealt with trying to understand the social perceptions that influence willingness to coexist with the animal, and that was framed mostly in risk.
OnX is the title sponsor of our podcast here at the Fair Chase, and it's a must-have app for all of us who love to explore the outdoors. Whether you're hunting or hiking or fly fishing, OnX gives you detailed, accurate maps right at your fingertips. With property boundaries, topographical features, and trail data, you'll always know where you are and where you're headed. You'll also likely be able to figure out where that big buck is headed to. Plus, their offline maps mean you're covered even in the most remote locations. OnX is the ultimate tool for outdoor navigation, making every adventure safer and more enjoyable. Download OnX today and explore with confidence.
Some people who had low capacity for living with mountain lions had the highest risk perceptions, the risk being the probability of harm to humans. And yet some people who lived with mountain lions the longest periods of time, people in the core of the Rocky area where they were never eradicated, had some of the lowest risk perceptions. They learned to live with the sun still comes up every day, even though there's mountain lions out there and there's nothing to, they work in and around them. And yeah, there's occasional sighting and so forth, but because it was a new risk, no matter what kind of a risk it is, that raises the risk meter. And if your perception is it's a risk to ungulate populations, your acceptance capacity for living with mountain lions is going to be lowered. If you think the risk of hunting mountain lions is to the existence of mountain lions, the risk meter goes up, because now the focus of the risk is on the sustainability of mountain lions, whatever that means to the individual. Well, I can tell you it's not a number. If anything through my life's work with both anecdotally and scientifically with wildlife-human interactions, that it's about the quantity and quality of the interactions that people have. If you have one lion and it's killing kids at bus stops, 0 is the right number for that community, likely. If you have 1,000 mountain lions and they don't kill kids and they don't kill goats and they don't attack sheep and they don't attack pets in the backyard and so forth, the acceptance capacity is high. And so it depends on the quality of the risk is what you think is important. And no two people will share that same belief. It might be similar, but not the same. And their beliefs are based on their interactions and experience with those animals, of which with a mountain lion, most of it's going to be vicarious. There are just not that many people who have actually had direct contact with mountain lions outside of a zoo. Most of the houndsmen I've interacted with, and that's a lot, are pretty darn good naturalists in their own way. They're observing. Many are recording, keeping careful records, tracks they see, where they're seeing them. And they have a pretty good qualitative sense of what the populations are high, low, medium. But on the flip side, if they're using hounds to hunt mountain lions, right, then there's a bit of conflict of interest that creeps into it, because they're not going to want to tell the whole story, because they don't want everybody rushing to their area. If they happen to have a lot of lions in their area, that I know very few would state that. practically, right, they're the ones that know how to catch cats. You don't learn that in college. So if you do away with hunting by referendum or legislation, there's California is a good case in point where you're still killing a lot of mountain lions, all over 100 mountain lions, as I understand it, a year. If that's done by the government, so to speak, or the state, they're going to have work with houndmen to do that, unless they have their own houndmen. And most of the states that have their own houndmen or have had them, those people emerge through the ranks of the sporting houndmen. And so when you ask about what is the right number, it isn't the right number. It has to do with those interactions. And it's that width, what I call social carrying capacity, the upper and lower bounds of willingness to live with the interactions that they're having with, in this case, mountain lions, but pick the species, could be squirrels. And so in class, I often, in the first day, I ask how many squirrels should be on the Michigan State University campus. And the students look at me like I'm a wingnut, all right? And the first hand will go up, will say as many as there can be. Because what are the negative interactions with a squirrel? They might steal your bagel once in a while, but not a lot. Well, how many would that be? Well, we could figure out carrying capacity of the squirrels. We do, elaborate studies on the mass production and the area and blah, 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 and come up with that number. Well, is that the number that should be? That's the number that could be. Is that the number it should be? That's the difficult part. And some people confuse that nuance of what can be and what should be. And what should be cannot be dictated by science or scientists. It can be informed by science and scientists. But that's a value-laden decision-making. And so then the question I ask the students, what if the squirrels suddenly were infected with a flea that carried a plague that was transmissible to humans? If the meter comes down, right? Whoa, that's telling me that they value human life more than squirrel life, right? And so that's a value. That's not something that we can measure that through social science, but that's not something a scientist can point to and say what should be. And so many people have worked on this area of social carrying capacity, and it comes under different names, of that range of quality and frequency of interactions people are willing to live with and seek to live with. And for every single person, it's going to be a little bit different. I have data in Livingston County and down the road in Michigan here, where 3 consecutive households were measuring their perceptions of deer are presumably all experiencing the same deer at the same time in the same ways, right? They live up 200 feet from me on the outskirts of each other. 3 different desired future populations. One wanted to decrease, one wanted them to stay the same, and one wanted to increase. Why? Because they interpret the interactions with those deer differently. Some people, we know that, see a deer, the reason they like to live in that kind of quasi-rural area is they see wildlife. And the biggest wildlife they see is deer. That's a positive interaction. Others are trying to raise tulips and hostas, and they can't. That's a negative interaction. So their acceptance starts to come down. Doesn't mean they want zero. They just want less. So that's what you're capturing, why wildlife management is different than wildlife ecology, because management is about integrating what can be with what should be. I think almost every state and province has protective regulations. They've classified either as a game species, a non-game species, some kind of a classification that provides some protection. There are a few exceptions to that. And we saw a resurgence throughout the West in the mid to late 80s through the 90s of mountain lions, and they seem to have held up. There's some places they decreased because of a variety of factors, loss of mule deer, maybe in some areas that are due to loss of habitat, or excessive mortality through either through hunting, poaching, or control actions. But many states are sustaining pretty high levels of harvest from mountain lions that were unimaginable when I started in the back in the 70s. It was just unimaginable that in Montana that you could harvest 500 mountain lions. I can remember when we harvested 80 in Montana, and it was just like a big deal. People didn't know what to make of it. So there's a reflection of a state where the current local values are such that it works its way over time through the legislature or commissions to say, I mean, in fact, it's saying it's open season on mountain lions, and other states are, and that could be sustained for a while, not likely for a long period of time, because there's a growing urbanization, suburbanization in North America, where many of the people who vote live in those urban, suburban, ex-urban areas, and they're going to vote according to their values. And so those states with referendum or ballot initiatives like California, like Michigan, like Colorado, will start to see some things handled differently outside of the legislature, where the people, the masses, are not satisfied, and they go around that whole policy-making body to the ballot box. Right. And when I see politics, I constantly hear, you got to get politics out of wildlife management. That's crazy. It's crazy talk. Because right, I've been trying to argue that it's about, what should be is about the values and beliefs of those people relative to what can be. And so it's just the way the politics are playing out. There's a capital P politics, sort of in the more purist sense, I think, that is about the allocation of values and the distribution of values and benefits and costs. There's the lowercase politics, which is about the struggle for control and that that tug of war that goes on. So and that's happening probably, or at least it's explicit, in the American West right now as much as anywhere, where you have that clash of value system between a large urban, suburban area voting in this large land area of the rural. Yeah, I don't know. The one is that they're a wilderness animal, and because they've been a poster child for wilderness in so many areas, and yet in heavily human occupied areas of California, you've got mountain lions. Certainly the whole front range of the Rockies from New Mexico to Alberta, you have mountain lions in among the people who are living there, if they're not getting killed, because we've actually enriched those environments with irrigation and fertilizer and ungulates, which is the crux of it. These things don't survive on mice. And so we've got everything we're doing that's benefiting ungulates, deer and elk and sheep, and both in numbers of species and abundance, is doing good things for mountain lions. And if that is in the suburban area where, right, most suburban areas don't have hunting for deer and elk, the deer and elk figure that out. The mountain lions aren't. They're going to say, well, that's downtown Boulder. I'm not going there. They're going where the deer are. They're going right in, as Charlie Russell's old painting, In Without Knocking, and which then becomes a new risk, and people's risk meter goes ring, until they start recognizing that they're living with these things and the people aren't dying and people aren't being attacked and so forth. So that's I think one thing, and it's worked against our science, because I think the very fine work of my friend Morris Hornacher and his graduate students, painted a narrative of this ghost of the Rockies. And so when the animal responded to the abundance of ungulates on the landscape, all of a sudden they were sleeping in window wells and people's barns. So that doesn't sound like a wild animal, a wilderness animal. And so I think we got some things, the narrative confused a little bit, partly because of where we studied them, and mostly in wilderness and wild areas, or places like Southern California where they're threatened by, remarkable development of habitat for people, not for deer, elk, and mountain lions. I think that people, they don't get it wrong, but the awe of the top level carnivores is that they only kill the old, the sick, and the hungry, and there's a little bit of that going on with mountain lions, but they're quite capable of taking down healthy animals. They're a remarkable, if not one of the most remarkable predators on the planet in terms of the size of animals that they can kill relative to their own size. And you look at can we get a skull? Let's get both of these, because this is another myth. So here's a skull of a male mountain lion, pretty good sized male, and you see that size of the area for the temporalis muscle that pulls the jaw up is huge. You see this area for the masseter muscle that pulls it down, huge, so that you can get this big gaping area, and you see they can get a bite, and the distance really between these two front teeth on a male like this is about the same width as the first vertebrae in a deer. Coincidence? I don't think so. And you see how hard it is for me to put this jaw back together. It's because we call that articulation. And with a bear, it moves all around, because a bear is like a grist mill. It's chewing and grinding everything. These things are shearing. They have a reduction in the number of teeth, and they're cutting and slicing meat. So that's a big male. Here's a subadult female, if I remember right. That was a radio-collared animal, and smaller, about 18-month-old cat. So one of the things that people who want to believe that there's harmony in nature depends on how you define harmony, because if you take this big male and you look at the holes in the skull of this 18-month-old cat, that's not a bullet hole. That is a canine, an incisor crunch on the back of that skull, because it's not uncommon for males to come into a new area and kill kittens that are not there. They perceive they're not their own. Now, for some people, that would be sort of harmony that's just nature, right? It's not, you can't put a moral value on that. It's what is, but it happens. It's not a Disney-fied world out there. It's at the top of the food chain.
This episode is also brought to you by 2O Gear, innovators in technical hunting clothing. 2O is a newer company. It's based right here in Michigan, and whether you're hunting elk in the mountains or chasing antelope in the plains or traipsing through swamps after that ruddy buck, 2O has you covered with premium jackets and pants, merino wool layers, everything you could possibly need to stay comfortable in the woods. Their products are engineered for functionality and durability, ensuring you stay protected in any conditions. Plus, their camo is really effective. We're big fans. So don't take our word for it, though. Go to 2ogear.com and check it out.
For me, is that we can coexist with almost all these uses of and interactions of mountain lions, I think that they play an incredibly important role as a top level carnivore, but that doesn't mean that they have to be everywhere all the time. And likewise, in some areas where things of value to people living there, there's going to have to be some control, and sometimes that control is lethal. And there's not another way around that. So I think it's all possible. You just can't have it all at the same time. It's that age-old adage with, you can have your cake and eat it too, but not at the same time, and not in every place. And that people can do a lot to live and coexist with mountain lions. Simple things like handling pet food, and pets, so they don't attract lions into neighborhoods, and taking precautions while they're on trails, keeping kids and children close by, and it's all part of living with nature, and coexisting at the same time. No, I just keep going back. Dan Botkin, who wrote a book you might be interested in on the side, Discord and Harmonies, New Ecology for the 21st Century, right? So this was back in the 90s, and I had the good fortune of working with Dan, and one of his case studies is the coyote-deer herd, and how pointed to the mountain lion as being the cause of reduction, not loss of habitat to ungulates from grazing, and drought, and that it's just over and over again. What we understand about the mountain lion is really more about what we believe than what we know. It's a crook. That's the Achilles. I call my students, it's the Achilles heel of wildlife management, because scientists can't tell how many animals can be in a landscape, and to just let nature take its course, so to speak, whatever that means, right? Is to say you value those animals' lives more than humans, which some people probably do, but as a culture, we have not adopted that, and there's little tolerance for loss of human life, or those things that are important to that human community. And that doesn't mean you go out and have to kill them all, but it's, again, you can be creative about what can happen, so that what should focus not necessarily on the numbers, but on creating the quality and frequency of the interactions that those people who are affected or impacted by wildlife, whether it's a mountain lion or a deer, have some weighted say in how that happens. Is that we're moving right from one of protection to one of management, as we went through eras of, eradication and very low numbers of some species went extinct, to an era of restrictions and regulations that came in with Theodore Roosevelt and et al., and led to, we're in an era of abundance. And our professional society here, Europe, as far as I can tell, other places don't have a paradigm for how to deal with abundance. And that's sort of I think the frontier, and it's happening in the urban, suburban, exurban areas as people ponder on how to deal with suburban black bears, suburban deer, suburban mountain lions. It's just a microcosm of this larger era of abundance for trying to get things under control.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's like you bring them all back and then you move into their area. That's like, what do you think?
Or you live here and you bring them all back, and the cats eventually, or whatever it is, it's going to be pouring in, and it's black bears, right? So you can do away with spring black bear hunting, and you can do away with hound hunting with bears in Colorado, and now you've got to deal with a lot of human problem issues. You can academically say, well, it's not a problem. That's just an interaction. Well, talk to those community leaders.